Australia faced this sort of extraordinary situation in the past fortnight relating to energy, and you would think on the face of it that how did we end up in this position? That's a whole other discussion for another time, because there's so many things that you can say about that. But just briefly, it was the Australian energy market operator jumped in and basically put a freeze on the wholesale market, as I think that's the way I understood it, and so that they essentially shut all of that down because there was a risk that because of the way the market was operating, that the public would have started experiencing down the east coast energy shortages leading to blackouts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole range of issues that were occurring. There was also the discussion around how there isn't significant enough reserves because we're too busy selling it to overseas, with the exception of Western Australia. And it was all a big mess. It looked like a big, it went south like a big cluster in one foul swoop. And obviously, something like this just doesn't pop up out of nowhere. It would have been building for some time. Obviously, we've got inflationary pressures. We've got issues happening overseas. You know, the Ukrainian conflict, and obviously Russia is a big exporter, etc., of energy, and all of these factors play into it. But obviously, there was a contingent of this being a domestic issue behind the scenes, and it seemed extraordinary that it got to a stage that the AEMO got to a point where they did something that they've never done in their history, which was to shut the market down to kind of put the brakes on the thing going out of control. It's quite extraordinary, really.
Well, they had to do it, I think, because of the structural imbalances in the national market. You know, you've got some states which have very high, like solar output, that rely effectively on the eastern states to like supplement that energy, say in the evenings. So there's a disincentive for, I guess, the main suppliers, and they're typically coal-fired power stations, to maintain high levels of supply when it costs them during the day, and you know they can't sort of, I guess, make that money back overnight without putting the prices up. So I don't really understand how the market works, but I think it's just this shifting of supply and the fact that we're now getting, peaks in the evening, and in some cases, in some places during the day, very low to zero demand, which means energy generators are selling, at very low prices, maybe even losses. So it is a mess, but I guess, as you say, it's probably something that's been building for a number of years and been overlooked, I guess, as a real weakness of the grid.
Absolutely. And I guess the inevitable tack on discussion to this is the whole renewables side of things, how it feeds into, we have to start, I don't know if it was used as an excuse, but as an example of this is why we need to start modernizing the grid and getting more renewables in the system, and this whole plan to transition away from the fossil fuel-based energy creation, et cetera, et cetera. I saw that there was a lot of discussion around that in relation to this, and whether or not one may have been like, the technicalities may have been like they're two different things, but I guess they were all feeding into each other.
But they do feed into it. I mean, I'm not quite sure, how we're going to solve this problem by purely moving to more renewables. With that, comes a need for localized battery storage. I think that what we're looking at is a fundamental change to the way electricity is generated, stored, and moved around the network. And I think that that's probably something that's a little bit more complicated than just focusing on the supply or the generation side of the market. You've also got to look at the demand side and what's happening there, especially with home solar and battery systems. I don't think from the little bit that I know, that it necessarily work very cleanly until everyone has, a solar panel and a battery. At that point, maybe then some of this more distributed grid or generation systems become workable. So it's obviously, while they've stabilised the market for now, I think longer term there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Absolutely. I'll try and tie this last topic in with that one. Obviously, there was a bit of anxiety produced by this whole outcome because I'm sure a lot of people were worried that they were going to be without power for a while, particularly on the East Coast. I'm sure the Western Australians were laughing all the way to from the other side of the country because they had a reserve policy in place for this sort of issue, but it kind of, the whole thing about the anxiety level about this sort of thing, it's like all of the, and I'm going to draw a long bow with this, but things like you've got also the natural disasters that are happening or that have happened in the last 6 to 12 months, and maybe a heightened awareness around where it feeds into things like climate change and needing to change the types of energy that we use, etc. And then there was also this idea that if we don't do any of this stuff, so there was the WHO article that I sent through about how mental health is also a priority in this whole discussion because you're going to feel you're going to have some issues mentally and from an anxiety point of view if what happens is if your area gets flooded every season, or what if because we don't do anything with power generation and fixing up the grid, if we get rolling blackouts indefinitely until it gets fixed. People underestimate that you take electricity for granted. For instance, you take for granted that natural disasters predominantly don't happen, but if these things keep going on and on and on, there'll be a heightened anxiety out there about how people live their lives and how they're able to if some of these things start getting disrupted.
Well, definitely. And I think the focus now on mental health and the dangers or the pressures that people feel that contribute to increased anxiety and I guess mental I don't know, mental conditions that are just not optimal. Uncertainty is the real killer for the human brain. So that creates an anxiety and can lead to any one of a number of conditions which just are a result of really poor mental health. And, I think this is often overlooked, although we talk about it. I think social media plays a big part in amplifying the uncertainty and the fear that, throughout communities. So I think that this will definitely become a very big issue looking forwards.